Ian Bone, a self-described class warrior, is inciting riots in London. So by now you've probably heard of Ian Bone. Now if you've been in politics for a while or you're over the age of 30, you might well remember Ian Bone going back to the 60s, 70s and even the 80s. He was the, quite a famous anarchist with multiple different magazines, and he was usually all over the television calling the politicians scum and calling for a revolution, etc. But if you're younger than that and you hadn't heard of him before, you probably heard of him a few days ago when he ambushed Jacob Rees-Mogg's home and terrorised his kids, and he told them that the country thinks their daddy is a horrible person. And it was appalling, and for all of that to come from a 71-year-old man, I mean, you certainly wouldn't expect that, and it's shocking. He's called Ian Bone, he's an anarchist and a publisher of anarchist newspapers, and he's also the man behind Class War, which was a magazine which then became a political organisation. And it's even stood as a political party before, actually. It was a significant newspaper back in the day. People heard of it, people knew of it, and basically it promoted confrontation as a way of changing things. He talked about the problems of democracy and, voting is useless and blah, blah, blah. But then he'd always talk about rising up against the system, and he'd talk of the Labour Party is the same as the Tories. And back then, actually, the Labour and the Tories were actually kind of different. So a bit bonkers. But he got so big that he even ended up on Jonathan Ross. Take a look at a quick clip.
What is Class War?
It's a very popular tabloid newspaper, which most people don't get to see because we can't sort the distribution out. It basically says that the rich, the Tories, the Labour Party, they're all against us. We should get up off our knees and fight back against the bastards.
And by the way, in that interview, he attacked the police and he encouraged people to rise up. And he wasn't talking democratically. In fact, Jonathan Ross asked him what he meant, and he just carried on rambling and talking in some convoluted way without actually answering the question. Because realistically, what he's talking about here is literally rising up. That's what this guy wants. Now, when Class War became a political party in 2015, they stood in the general election. And in fact, I was involved in politics at the time, and I'm pretty sure one of our candidates was up against one of the Class War guys. It might have been Ian Bone. I'll have to check that one up. But yeah, I remember they stood in 2015 and they didn't really get anywhere. But it was the same kind of nasty stuff. And Ian Bone, what he said, the reason why he wanted to stand as a candidate is because, quote, all the other candidates are scum. That was his response. That was his reasoning for standing. Now, I know I use strong words about politicians. I've certainly said some pretty strong things in the past, but it seems to me that Ian Bone just says this stuff for the sake of it. I like people who try and get into the nitty-gritty and argue and have a sensible discussion, an interesting discussion, one that actually looks at the sources of problems and how to tackle them, whereas Ian Bone just seems to be a loudmouth. He's just a nasty guy. He says these terrible things, I think, just to provoke a response. I've yet to hear anything constructive or interesting come out of this guy's mouth. He just shouts expletives and scares people's children. No doubt unhappy, by the way, that his mental ideas are being completely ignored by the public and that nobody seems to take class war seriously. Who wants a class war, by the way? I'm working class. I don't want to war against the middle class or the upper class. It's insanity. But now he's doing publicity stunts to try and get some attention. Of course, the first one being scaring the living daylights out of Jacob Rees-Mogg's kids. But now he's calling for a riot. Yes, a riot. Foul-mouthed anarchist pensioner Ian Bone, who recently terrorised Jacob Rees-Mogg's children, is calling for a riot in central London. In a tweet earlier this month that went completely unnoticed until today, Bone called for a riot against Brexit on October 20th. He also called it a riot against the old Etonians. And no, this isn't a protest. This isn't standing around with placards and shouting a few slogans. This guy called for a riot. And make no mistake, by the way, inciting a riot is a crime under the Public Order Act with a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment and an unlimited fine. Ian Bone is doing something unlawful. And he's proof that the left have been violent and insane for decades. The insanity of the left, the insanity of the Diane Abbott politics, but also the absolute chaos of Antifa is nothing new. This goes back a long time, and they called themselves anarchists. It's crazy. And riots against a democratic decision By the way, a democratic decision made in a referendum in 2016 for us to leave the European Union, a riot against that can bring democracy crashing down, and that's exactly what Ian Bone wants. I hope that the far left and Antifa have long lost interest in Bone, although I saw people out the other day with him celebrating his attack against Jacob Rees-Mogg, literally wearing penis outfits. I don't know if you saw that. These people still do hang around him, but if these people haven't gotten tired of Ian Bone after all these decades, and if they do riot on October 20th, I hope Ian Bone feels the full weight of the law. Catch up with all the Rebel stories on our brand new app, which you can download now from the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store.